Good evening, guys. Welcome to the January 18th, 2020 business meeting. Can we all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge of Allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We are joined by 6 of our trustees, our superintendent of schools, Dr. Timothy Harney, our assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction, Dr. Ted Fulton, our interim assistant superintendent for finance, Mr. Luis Montero, our district legal counsel, Mr. Neil Block, our district clerk, Mr. Dan Benetti, and our student rep, Ms. Grace Witt. Just a quick update. As always, there's 2 opportunities for the community to participate during the Board of Ed meeting. The first is just before the board takes up its agenda, and the second follows disposition of all agenda items. As always, if you'd like to speak, we ask that you please come to the podium. You must be a registered voter of the school district. Any other person must be authorized by a majority vote of the Board of Education. As always, we ask that you keep that time to approximately 3 minutes. As always, the board is, any board meeting is live streamed and posted there to the district website. If you'd like to follow Dr. Harney on Twitter, you can follow him at BBP Soup. You can follow the district at BBP Schools. But before we get into our superintendent report, we'll open it up for any community new business. Not hearing any, we will throw it over to Dr. Harney for superintendent report. Dr. Harney, how are you tonight, sir?
Good, thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our January 18th Board of Education meeting. So since the last time we met on January 4th, just a couple of updates for you to give you some information. So I guess I'll start with the first one. As you know, over the last 2 weeks, I've probably received definitely 3, maybe 4 different updates from the New York State Department of Health. We have added everything to the website, so that's where you've seen a couple things. So the most recent one is dated January 14th, and really what they are is just reminders or refreshers on certain guidelines related to isolation, which has to do when someone is actually positive versus quarantine, so they're up there. There is one good resource up there if you're interested in. There's a table that kind of what happens depending on a person's situation. That is pretty good in terms of it's one of their better tables, so that is something for everyone so that is there as well. We will continue to do the community testing on Thursdays, and I would also like to remind the community, especially members for our students and stuff, if a family finds themselves in a situation where they cannot get themselves their hands on a test, we do have them. As you know, we did 2 distribution. We'd be more than happy to, if you just reach out to the school nurse of that building, we'd be more than happy to get you one. So we do have those, and we continue to receive them through the New York State Department of Health, so that is just something. So that's kind of the COVID update. Just a couple other things. You're going to hear Mr. Frontario in a little while give a budget presentation, which I'll kind of introduce. But this is really kind of the first where we're just starting to get information to people. I know we've received a lot of questions about things that we've talked about, whether it be transportation, pre-K. We're very much in the early stages, so I'll kind of touch upon that in a little bit, so we have that. So that's something. As you know, as we've had the enrollment committee going, we are meeting again this week. I have received some updated data on the 2021 school year, which was last year. So we'll be sharing that with the committee, and then we'll have the minutes available for the public as always. And then after that, we're still waiting on 21-22 data from the demographers. So this is going to take a little bit of time just because of all the information that we're trying to get from the demographers. So I know at one point we had talked about a presentation in probably March. I'm not sure if we're going to hit that timeline or not, but we'll keep people updated as we're going forward. So we are doing that. So that's kind of the enrollment. On a side note is transportation. So we've had, probably since we had Eastern Suffolk BOCES come in here and do the transportation study in terms of the safety zones, the committee has had, I want to say, 4 or 5 meetings. We were meeting on really on a bi-weekly basis. And really what our focus became, and we'll end up doing a presentation for everybody during the budget cycle, but I'll just kind of give you a quick overview. What we've been doing is we were kind of looking at the safety zones and really where the committee's work had started after we reviewed the entire document is there a way to add buses where nobody would be crossing a major road such as Nichols or Montauk Highway, and then also that no one would be crossing a railroad crossing? So that's where we had started. And Mr. Cordes has been doing a number of presentations for us and looking at that, and a number of the committee members and just adding information to that. Where we are right now, it looks like that within the budget cycle, there's a couple things we have to do is we've been talking now about adding 4 buses. And remember, there's a process to all of this, which what that would do is it would let us hit a number of the safety zones. It would allow exactly what I said. Nobody would cross Nichols or Montauk or a railroad. And then in hindsight, what it would do, it was probably reduce the elementary mileage, but it's really about the safety zones. It's almost like a 0.75, but we're still playing around with that. So that is stuff that we're going to bring forward to the board and do a presentation on. The reason I bring this up is just because, like, from an order of events, if you remember, the board at one point, probably within the next 1 or 2 meetings, will have to accept the document from Eastern Suffolk BOCES and basically saying, yes, this document is valid, it's accurate, those type of things, which through the committee work, I'm very comfortable in saying that that is the case. Then what would happen is we would make, the committee, remember the committee only makes recommendations, would do a presentation. And again, it's probably the February 15th meeting or the one right after that, which would be, I guess, early March, we would do that. And then if we were to, if we were to involve it or include it, into the budget for the 22-23 school year, we would do that. And then there would, as always, there would have to be a referendum into the May vote because it has to do with transportation. So it's not just something that can happen. So that's kind of where we are within the transportation committee right now. So I'd just like to thank everybody for that. But that group has been meeting on a regular basis. And really the next thing you'll see is us just adopting the report from Eastern Suffolk BOCES. We've been asked a number of questions over the last, I guess, 2 weeks. We received a number of emails about pre-K. You've heard Dr. Fulton do presentations on pre-K. It is still very much a discussion point. It is going to be something that we will talk about more into the budget cycle. As I said, tonight's presentation is really Mr. Frontario kind of talking about our current budget, rolling over certain things, and kind of giving an idea of where we are in terms of a budget and a tax levy, and then we'll kind of go from there. But that's kind of where we are with the pre-K, so we have not forgotten about that, and it's still part of our discussion cycle. And that also will be a presentation that will be done during the budget cycle. So all these things we're very excited about kind of digging into a little bit more in depth. Last meeting we had, I believe it was one of our Board of Ed trustees had asked about middle school sports and specifically baseball at the middle school level. Mr. Mullins has been doing a ton of research on this. That's one of the things we had talked about at that meeting was we were talking about we wouldn't just look at it in terms of one sport, we were looking at it globally in terms of the middle school. So he is collecting all that information. He's going to put together a presentation for the Board of Ed and the community at our next meeting. So that will be that February, I must say it's February 1st. So he'll be doing a presentation there. And the last thing I have for you is just to remind this Thursday night we have the jazz band concert at the high school, so we're looking forward to that. And like we've been doing with our middle school and high school sports and all of our winter concerts, this one will be live streamed as well. And I know Mr. Weber will be getting that link out to everybody so that they'll have access to the concert. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Tony. We will pass it over to our student rep, Ms. Wood. How are you tonight?
I'm good, thank you. Jameson Smith earned first team All-New York State football, and Freddie Clark earned second team All-New York State football, so congratulations to the two of them. Also, congratulations to Ryan LeClaire on earning his Eagle Scout in Troop 130. The students are preparing for musical Newsies right now, which they are very excited about. It is in a couple weeks, so we hope you come to support. February 11th is PS I Love You Day, and all kids are encouraged to wear purple in support of mental health awareness and to support the fight against bullying. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it as always. We'll turn it back over to our superintendent of schools to introduce Mr. Montero to discuss our second budget presentation. Dr. Horn?
Thank you, Mr. Miller. So, one of the things where I'd like to talk about this every single year, it's just kind of a reminder that I'm not going to go too in depth into it, is though every time we start the budget cycle, and I know as you start to look at it, people start to look at it through different lenses. One of the lenses that we look at it through is really trying to create a budget that is how can we add to our current programs and continue to offer more offerings for our students, as long as at the same point where we can be efficient and do it in the proper way, not just to add to add. So obviously this year there are a lot of conversations that have been going on around, and you've heard them, the transportation, you've heard about the pre-K. So those are things that we will kind of take a look at in this year's budget. Really though, when we're looking at the budget, it's very easy to look at it from year to year. That is not something that we want to do as a school district. We want to try to look at it long term. As you know, probably since the time I've been sitting in the seat, we've been talking about enrollment as one of the things that we've been continuously looking at. And remember, just because enrollment is declining, it does not necessarily mean reduction in offerings. It's actually the opportunity to take a look at things and say, hey, can we do things a little bit differently and actually be a little more efficient? So those are the things that we continuously take a look at when we're looking at the budget. And we know this is, as the budget is being created, as I said, we want to look at it from the long term. We want to look at it through our goals. And again, just because we have some changes, like for example, as we've seen, there's been more needs in terms of the mental health for our students and for our staff. So that is something that we're continuously looking at. As a matter of fact, we just had a conversation about that today, in terms of the social and emotional piece. So that is something we're always looking to do. We're always looking to see what else we can offer to our students. We're looking to see as far as our demographics change, what are the services that we need so that we can provide all of our students with equal access to whatever curriculum is that will most benefit them. So these are just some of the things that we look at it from a budget standpoint. So when you see tonight, don't look at it in isolation. That's probably my biggest ask. Look at it as, okay, this is the beginning of a conversation. You're not going to see the nitty-gritty stuff tonight. Tonight you're going to see more of Mr. Fronterio's numbers and things that we're talking about and where it looks like our tax levy will be and why is our tax levy. You're going to hear about debt service. You're going to hear really the things that aren't as exciting about is talking about transportation of pre-K. We have to start somewhere, so this is kind of where we are starting. And things that I would remind you to keep in the back of your mind is we are in that year where a lot of our bond now is starting to come on. The library bond is playing into it. So that's why when you hear Mr. Frontero talk about debt service, that will play a lot into what our tax levy is and those type of things. So I just really would try to kind of set the stage a little bit for you and kind of what we do as we look into this. And then really over the next 3 months, we will dive deeper and deeper into the actual budget and then really start to talk about, all right, what does it look like from a staffing standpoint? What does it look like from a program from a point of view? So those are the things, and that's why I said is we'll have different presentations throughout the course of the budget cycle, so this way that people can get a good understanding of what it is that we're hoping to propose. Then obviously we'll take feedback from the Board of Education so that we can kind of make our decisions and then also from our community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Fronterio, and we'll go from there.
Good evening. Okay. Yeah, this tool is very important. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to make a budget workshop, the second presentation. Back on December 7th, I kind of introduced the whole process and a little bit about the calendar and where we were headed. And tonight, essentially, I'm going to be looking a little bit more at revenue, even though, as Dr. Roney said, we need to always look at it in its entirety. But I'll be speaking about revenue, but also about expenditure, but then not as great detail. So the initial tax cap calculation, you've heard about that 2% tax cap. I'll explain what that looks like and where we currently are at the moment. In terms of state aid, the governor actually came out with a budget today, a discussion of that budget. I haven't seen the runs yet. I hope we see them by tomorrow, and that will give us a little bit more information. Although I am showing state aid runs from the New York State Council of School Superintendents as a sort of a jump-off point to get an idea about what state aid is all about. And a little bit about reserve accounts, a little bit about our other revenues. In terms of our agenda, we always start with the district goals, important time frames, which Dr. Farmer mentioned, but it's important to keep in mind that we have sort of a map set out, and we're going to follow that, and the process will continue to unfold in more and more detail. Allowable tax levy changes over time, the pieces of the revenue puzzle, the calculation of the allowable tax levy, two state aid scenarios, local and other revenues, the reserves that we have, a 12-year study of budget. And this is important because you get a sense of where we've been. When we look at history, we have an idea of where we have been and where we're headed. And we also get a sense of that we can smooth things out over time. Expenditure summaries, revenue summary, the next meeting, and some questions. So as promised, these are our district goals. It's a living document. It's both student and community centered, and it's subject to change as we go along. Definitely, though, it definitely, in terms of our plan, is why we do what we do every day, why we show up. In terms of the calendar and the time frames, you'll notice that December 7th, I said was completed. I had actually reviewed what the rollover budget might look like, what the elements of that is, in terms of just staying where we are, but moving up the year. All the services, all the staff, all the programs, all the things we know about the district are intact with the rollover budget, but it doesn't include any new initiatives, which are things that we'll discuss as the process unfolds. January 4th, I didn't necessarily have enough information to make a presentation at that time. We were waiting for the controller to give us the tax cap percentage. I got it a few days ago. On the 4th, I was also working on the rollover budget and putting some of the finishing touches on that, so I wasn't necessarily ready. So the 18th, which is tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about that tax cap. I don't have much to talk about in terms of the governor's proposal yet. I thought we might have, so I included it here. But that will also be something that I'll touch on when we hit the February 1st presentation. In terms of the history of the tax cap, you can see that it's been all over the map, and the reason for that is the lower of the CPI or 2%. So if the CPI is fine, we just found out in the controller's office that the CPI is 4.7. So if it's 4.7, that means that the tax cap prevails at 2%. And occasionally it's been as low as 0.12%. And districts have had to deal with that. And we have learned to live within the cap as much as we possibly can, and I can see that our district has for sure. Again, it's a puzzle. Ultimately, that'll be a perfect square. State tax levy is our biggest source of revenue. That comes as no surprise, I'm sure. State aid being the second, but we have some very other important revenues, locals and reserves, which are important to closing the gap. Because whatever we decide we're going to do on the expenditure side, in terms of the budget, we have to have exactly those dollars on the revenue side. So it will be in balance, and we will, again, through the process and through the dance, ultimately get to that point, that sweet spot where we have a budget that we're pleased with, that provides our students with everything that they need in our community support, and also on the revenue side that it is appropriate in terms of its various increases. So I had to put this slide in because the next slide took up so much room that it would be hard for you to see it. I'm going to try to make it as easy for you to see as possible. But it is, the next slide is the formula for the calculation of the tax rate. So let me walk you through this as I unpack it, and it's really pretty straightforward. I think any fourth grader could probably work through these calculations if they had to. We start with our current tax levy, $55,530,215. That's voter approved and is within our tax levy cap. And then from that, we get a growth factor. That growth factor comes from Albany and the Office of Real Property Services. And what it means is if there's been construction going on in our environments and other things and changes in our property, it ends up being reflected in the growth and multi-growth factor. That number, that 1.0038, I multiply by the current tax levy and come up with 55,741,229. So it's about $200,000 higher. Then we get to add current year pilots. Now we have nothing to do with AmeriCorps here. Pilots are payment in lieu of taxes. And there are very often, we don't have any in this community. We may have had it in the past because it's on the calculation, but at the moment we don't. And what that really is, the payment in lieu of taxes, is usually it has to do with economic development, and where a town like Islip or Brookhaven might offer for, let's say, a contractor wanted to come in and build 100 units rental apartments, and that's good for the tax base, let's say. So the town might want to offer a tax abatement, and the tax abatement might be that the actual owner of the property doesn't pay property taxes for 10 years. But what happens is with economic development is that tax levy that we're not going to get becomes a payment in lieu of taxes, otherwise known as a pilot. And so we would get that over a 10-year period, payable from either town of Islip or town of Brookhaven. I don't know if we've had them in the past. I think we may have. At the moment, we don't. So there's actually nothing that we have to do in terms of adding. Then I looked at the next item is the current exclusions for capital. And this is what was used last year in coming up with our tax levy. So I had to dig that number out of our files, that $2,241,354. That number is subtracted from the tax levy with the growth factor, and we end up with $53,499,875. That becomes our base for the tax levy. We multiply that by the 2%, which was set by the controller. So we multiply that out, we end up with $54,569,873. And again, we have less any pilots from next year, which we don't have, and we don't have any carryover, so that would be something that, again, is zero. And we bring that number down at $54,569,873, and that becomes our tax levy before exclusions. So frankly, if we didn't have exclusions, we probably would have a negative tax levy. But we have these exclusions for capital. There are reasons for exclusions. You can have the teacher's retirement system or employee's retirement system. Anything over a 2% increase would be part of an exclusion, but that hasn't come to fruition in many years. So the real exclusion that most districts have has to do with capital. And I'm going to go over how I got to, you see that brown square, that $3,208,980 is the current exclusion amount, subject to possible change. And I'm sure as we review it, we will. But that number, that $3,200,002, is added to our base levy of $54,569,873 to give us an allowable tax levy maximum of $57,778,853, which when we compare it to our current levy is up 4.5%. And again, so the district could, if they wanted to raise the levy, they could raise it that high, let's say, and still be within the cap. It doesn't require a 2/3 majority to vote. Okay, so that's how we get to that limit. Let me talk a little bit about how we get to this exclusion, because this is a key piece. I had to first see what was happening last year in 21-22. So we had our debt service, and we had our estimated building aid, and when you subtract the two, you come up with an exclusion. So that's where I got that $2,241,354 from. In 22-23, we have our debt service all schedule-wise, etc. But we also had a in our debt service, we have the library as well. And in 22-23, the library debt service will go up about $1,030,000. And so the first thing I did was I had to back that out because the library is an ours, and we don't calculate our tax, our exclusion based on library debt. So I backed that out. I got the $4,277,222. Currently looking at an estimated building aid of about $1,008,000. We still don't know what that's really going to look like because state aid is usually a moving target. It changes as we go along. Things happen. We give them new data, and they readjust the numbers almost all the time. So, but right now, for argument's sake, that's the number I see when I look at the current run by the superintendents, the New York State Council of School Superintendents. I subtracted that out, and I came up with $2,429,695. And then another part of the calculation is to estimate what you might actually spend in capital in 22-23, a good faith estimate from non-borrowed funds. So, give or take, I estimated roughly $720,000. Might be some, because some of the things that we've been talking about would come in somewhere around there. It might be a conservative estimate, actually. It might be a little higher. But the point being is that it is defendable and it is a good faith estimate. And then BOCES gives us this, the BOCES capital exclusion, which is, BOCES has buildings, and they also have a capital exclusion, even though they don't set taxes. They're able to identify what our portion of all their buildings is, their debt service, if you will, and net of the state aid. That $59,285 is pretty much a fixed number. As you can see when you go through the calculation, adding, subtracting, and so forth, the total cap exclusion for capital projects is $3,208,980. Again, it could change. The debt service is a fixed number, but the estimated billing aid could change as I get more information. So that might change. And the estimate on capital expenditures that we will make in 22-23, that also could be adjusted up or down. So it's in a state of flux. We don't know yet, but somewhere around that presentation that I just made, that on here, you can see that with our allowable tax levy would be above 4%. So that's kind of a misnomer when you hear a tax cap is 2%. It really depends on the district, and it depends on their capital projects and whatever exclusions they might have and so forth. So it varies from district to district. In terms of state aid, there are two slides I have about that. And this one, as I said, I mentioned, was from the New York State Council of School Superintendents. They went through the data file from SED and came up with a projection of state aid in 22-23. But I'm showing it versus what it was on April 1st when the governor came out with the budget. So we budgeted actually about $17 million versus $16,636. It shows a decrease. But frankly, if you look at this version, which is the one that the Superintendent's Council used, it only shows possibly a slight decrease. The point being is that state aid is a moving target. Ultimately, when we look at the governor's proposal, and again, that's only a proposal. Ultimately, the legislature therefore has to agree. But once we get to that number, we will end up with a aid number that is worthy of us looking, if you will, and it will be the right number to use. Again, given the fact that it will move and change, it will change from time to time. In terms of the factors of state aid, the foundation aid is our largest source of state aid that has no strings attached to it. It's the money we get that's actually outside the formula, because if they ran the formulas, we would get less of it. So we are grandfathered in, as they call it, with a safe harbor, if you will, so that number actually can't go down, but it can only go up. At least that's what they're saying to us. But all the other things are pretty much expense driven. We have postage expenditures, it drives aid. We have transportation expenditures, that drives 8. We have building expenditures, that produces 8. Those are categorical aids versus the foundation aid, which is the basic. Again, it remains to be seen and will be part of more discussions that we have about the revenue side. In terms of all other types of revenues, you can notice that we have booked things like non-resident tuition and other student fees, which include AP exams and Frost Valley and things like that, interest income, refund of prior year expense, and you can see that totals $1,813,187. Now, if you look at the 22-23, you'll notice that it's jumping a bit higher. And the reason for that is, as I mentioned before, on our expenditure side, which again I'm not talking about in great detail, but on our expenditure side of our 22-23 budget, in our debt service, we have to budget not only the district's debt service, but also the library. And for the first time, that is hitting for their construction or bond. And that's $1,030,000 plus $186,000 in interest. So that's going to be on the expense side. So right now, our budget is up about 2.99% from the current year, first draft. Of that 2.99, over a percentage of it is related to the fact that we have to raise the budget to make sure we have enough money in debt service to include the library. However, on the revenue side, the library is going to be paying us the $1 million principal and interest due during the school year. So it's an offset, but not in the budget. We have to build it in, and then we'll get it on the revenue side when it comes in during the school year. And that's part of all of our local or other revenue sources. So we talked about tax levy, we talked about state aid, and we're talking about our other sources, and these are our local ones. Now we have reserves, which are kind of like savings accounts, if you will, and they're funded from our available fund balance. Every year at the end of our school year, we are audited, they review our books and records, and ultimately we determine, they look at our actual revenues versus actual expenditures. There's what's ever left over from there after we do our 4% set aside, after we do our appropriated fund balance, we have this number that's left. And that number usually gets put back into reserves. I also use the reserves. They have, first of all, they use for specific purposes. Once you establish it, and it's done by law, and it's very complex as to how you develop these reserves, it's how you use them. You have to be very careful, but I have to use them and only for the purposes that they were designed. But I also use them on the revenue side because we can use them to help to balance the budget. And it's actually a best practice from both the state comptroller and SED to use revenues on the revenue side as well, but you have to have them budgeted, which I did. So here was our audited balances at June 30th of 2020. See, we have the two retirement systems, employees retirement system, teachers retirement system, employee benefits, accrued liability, workers' compensation, and unemployment. There are a few others that we could have, but these are the ones pertaining to our district. So that was the balances on June 30th of 2020. And June 30th of 2021, we've been able to add about $2 million back into our reserves at the end of June 30th of 21. So that, we're going in the right direction. The state controller will never tell you how high a reserve can be. They say, we know it's too much when we take a look at it. Right now, we're looking for a goal of about 4 years' worth of expenses. So if the employees' retirement system is about $1 million a year, we're about getting close to that mark. The others, we need some time to go through that. In terms of history, too, and spreading things out, and trying to smooth things out so we don't get spikes as much as we possibly can. If you look at the past 12 years, budget-to-budget increases and tax levy increases, and even in the past couple of years, through 2018-19, we're somewhere in that 2% range. Right now, we're at 2.99. Tax levy, again, we're not sure, but that's going to fall out, and there'll be a lot of discussion about that, and where we're headed. We also, I'm not sure exactly what we might be adding to the budget, because again, we're at 2.99. just keeping everything basically the same, no new initiatives, moving everybody up, salary schedules, et cetera, all of that. And getting input from administrators and the like. So, we'll have to see how that plays out, but right now this is where it looks like we are falling out. When I studied the current year's budget that went up 1.81, what I noticed is that it looks like reductions in BOCES impacted a lot on that budget. So that's why it happened to be 1.81, but for the most part it runs, in that 2% range. Same thing with, tax levy over the couple of years that we had some, voter approved again, because it voted by our community, where it actually exceeded, not the cap, never exceeded the cap, but where it increased significantly over the budget. Here's an average on the budget, 2.06, and on the tax levy, 2.7. Again, we're going to fall in pretty much right there at the moment, moving forward. In terms of the expenditure side, and again, I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on this, but as you can see, right now I'm still analyzing the general support, which is all central administration kinds of expenditures, all instruction, which includes special ed, pupil transportation, and debt service and employee benefits. If you look at that, right now we're at, as I mentioned, 2.99. It's about $2,303,978 increase over the current budget. And at the next slide on February 1, I will probably present this in the incremental values as well, with the dollar amounts and the percentages. But remember, with any budget, we have to have the same thing on revenue side. We have to equal that. So right now, it's anybody's guess where we might fall out, but let's say we need to get to that 79,276 number, and we already have a sense of where our tax levy will be headed based on the cap. So this is one possible scenario of many, many scenarios we will have with respect to determining what it will be, what the overall revenue package will be. So this one assumes, again, one of many possibilities, that our tax levy was only up by 255. It assumes a possible decrease in state aid. The all other revenues have kind of reduced that increase a little bit, just to assume we may not get all that we're hoping to, even though in terms of the local revenues, we've actually exceeded the budget over the past few years as I look back at information that I'm getting. It assumes we appropriate the same fund balance as we currently have. I'm using a little bit more in reserves than we did in the current year. And again, we are in balance. We are where we need to be in terms of the budget. What number we ultimately come up with on the expense side, we have to come up with that very same number on the revenue side. And again, adjustments will be in tax levy as we find out more about state aid. The governor, from what I understand, is adding, again, it's her proposal, it's got to go through legislation, and the legislators are going to fight back and forth and so forth. But from what I can tell, it's extremely generous, and that it is going for about a $2 billion increase in state aid to school districts. I don't know, we don't know yet how that's going to play out. When we see the runs, we'll have a better idea. And ultimately, by April 1, we'll know for sure, because that's when the budget for the state is set. And by then, they've done all the machinations, all the back and forth negotiations up in Albany to come up with a package to take a look at. So we'll see how that plays out. So we're getting there. Okay, and in terms of the next meeting, which is February 1, I'm going to start to unpack the expenditure side of the budget and explain, probably focus in on the 1000 series budget codes, which is Board of Education, Superintendent's Office, Business Office, Legal, Auditing, those kinds of things. And then in subsequent meetings, presentations talk more about instruction, but it will be the same format in terms of looking at the current year's budget, the past year, and the proposed year. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Panteria. Any trustee questions? Mr. Johnson?
Yes, so that 299 budgeting, your budget increase, that's assuming 100% programs, no,
Correct. That assumes that
that's all in, it's an all in.
all in.
So it could technically be reduced if there's, if we need to find areas to tighten, but that's an all-in budget.
That's an all-in budget, that's right.
And that's also assuming that we would reach the tax cap of 4.05.
The tax cap number that I'm currently showing, based on the calculation, this, subject to refinement, if you will, is the tax levy that the board conceivably could go up to and still be within the cap. Not piercing the cap. Piercing the cap requires 2/3 majority vote, we've never done that. In fact, in the 10 years the tax cap has been in play, the district has never exceeded it, and in 3 of those 10 years, we've come in lower than the tax cap would have allowed. So this gives you a lot of room and a lot of discretion, as Dr. Harmon spoke of. We need direction, we need discussion, we need to find out what budget can we bring to our community, both on the expense side and maintaining programs and services, and what can we live with on the tax levy increase part of it that makes sense and that will garner support from the community.
I guess what I'm trying to say is we're looking at an all-in budget, but we're also making the assumptions that our other revenues outside of our tax levy are going to be flat or reduced.
Right.
Like no state aid being added to this year.
At the moment.
So, but to me, it sounds like a little bit of a worst case scenario. So you would agree that there's a lot of room for like opportunity to either add programs or if the board decides to reduce that tax levy to a lower number.
Yes. On revenue, I would rather underpromise and overdeliver. So, in other words, estimate lower and be happy when it comes in $1 million higher, give or take. And on the expense side, we want to estimate as high as we possibly can in the sense that it will actually be a little bit less. Now, but the 299 budget is fairly close. I mean, I've checked with personnel. We've gone person by person, name by name, moved everybody up on the salary schedules, we've met with all the building principals and administrators to look at their budgets, where they have made requests. All of that is in there at the moment. All of that is in there.
Any other trustee questions? Mr. Brodsky?
Just a couple things I want to make sure that I've got straight, and then I have a couple questions following that up. State aid runs, we don't have definite numbers on those yet, correct?
No, I'm hoping tomorrow.
Okay. And I think Mr. Johnson touched on it a little bit. We're right now a tax cap compliant levy based on your projections, which is still very early, 4.05%. I noticed that our estimated building aid is going down from 2.46 to 18.5 million. And based on the numbers that we're currently projecting, state aid is relatively stagnant, and particularly foundation aid is almost no change from year on year. Is that accurate?
It's early to tell, but I was just looking at one of the run. The reason state aid is such a moving target is because I provide actual financial data to them, real stuff.
Right.
And then the SP3 has a column for estimates for 22-23. And they take that data, they do all kinds of machinations, and they come up with what they think are adjustments as we go along. The building aid number that you saw, at April 1, that number was over $2 million.
Right.
On April 1, and that was a reasonable number to use when you were finally doing the budget. You say, okay, this is right from the state, this is from, the governor's, now it's a past budget, if you will. And it was perfectly reasonable. So when we see the runs, if not tomorrow, very soon, we'll have a better idea. Because all of our final cost reports have been submitted, which is the PPs to driving building aid. So we'll see what that really means.
Yeah, I guess my only comment to that is, I know it's still early from our perspective. To me, it's disappointing that from a state perspective, that the aid would stay relatively stagnant. I mean, at least not even compensating for inflation. on a yearly basis, which isn't, a Bayport Blue Point thing, that's a state thing. Just a couple of other items I wanted to touch on. So right now, our rollover budget is 2.99% increase year on year. So that will leave us roughly a little over 1% wiggle room under the current tax cap compliant budget for things like that we have discussed, such as UPK and transportation expansion. That my understanding is they're not in that 2.99.
That is correct. There are no issues.
Okay. I think one of the things that would be beneficial for me is to see the projected impact on a tax levy percentage for items that we're looking at adding.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think you've actually done that. I think even last year there was a proposal that was possibly adding transportation and showed the impact on the tax bill. I'm sorry for that.
No, what I was going to say is, what I was thinking, and you tell me if the board is okay with this, is as we are, no matter what, we want to do presentations on the pre-K, we want to do ones on the transportation, because those are items that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And with that, we will assign a cost to it.
Okay.
The one thing that Mr. Fronteria does have in there is, and again, unfortunately, in the world we're living in, is we still have some of the COVID costs that we've had in the past built in.
I have questions.
And I'm hoping that some of that's already in there can say, okay, we're moving away from this, and some of that can be used. So it's almost like there'd be no feeling to it, so to speak, in terms of
Because you get
trading the money. That's what I'm
Yeah.
hoping.
Yeah.
But we will give you a cost analysis, because at some point you might say to us as a board, you know what, we really would like you to add this, so please tell us what the implications would be. What are we trading for this if we can't move away
Yeah,
from
exactly.
So we'll do that as we go along.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, Dr. Hearn, you touched on one of my other questions about whether, since it's a carryover budget, we have things like PPE and that included as well. Okay. On the revenue side, some of the revenue that was suspended by COVID, I'll say suspended. And a silly example that kind of came to my mind was lunch. I know we're not charging for lunch currently because of the federal act.
It's
and-
totally separate from this.
Right.
It's totally separate from the general fund.
Okay. Okay. So I guess is that revenue stream projected as back in, or we're still holding it out on operating under the assumption that we're still not going to be able to proceed with charging kids for lunch next year?
Other than, again, this is general fund, so the food service tax refund is a separate. But,
Dance studio, rent out the one.
Right.
So it's interesting. So
those kinds of
the
possible.
dance
revenues.
studio is in there, but what's interesting now is that obviously is because the winter season has been a little bit different in terms of obviously the COVID piece, right?
Right.
So what we've had is because we haven't had places here, some of them have gone to find different revenue, as areas to be, and others are still inquiring about can they still do it here. So I don't know if I don't know what number you'll see next year based until we finish this year.
Sure.
But that is the best one that
Yeah.
Johnson just alluded to. That's the one that I'm a little bit short of.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of all other revenues, when I look back a few years, we've exceeded what we budgeted.
Okay.
So, again, and that, ultimately, I reduced it by $200,000. But, there may be other adjustments in there that I
Sure.
ultimately, again, to try to underclimb some of the numbers.
Right. Just two other quick things. And I know that, this is a preliminary tax gap number, but from a perspective, I would like to see kind of where we fall. And I know Newsday always kind of, puts out where the districts fall, but if we could get out from Newsday, that would be good.
Oh, absolutely, that
just-
data will be collected.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
because I'm curious how, that type of tax cap increase would fall with districts that are, I guess, of similar size and similar, revenue ratio. I forget what the correct technical term is for that. Wealth ratio, combined wealth ratio.
The interesting part part to that, Mr. Boraski, is probably twofold. There's one, if you were to ask me to guess from a tax levy standpoint, my guess is it would probably be one of the higher ones right now, just from what we did in the past. Sure. But when you compare district to district, I often caution because right now we are getting hit with the debt service off the bonds.
Right.
So that is, so unless you're having a similar district, similar size, similar revenue, and then also is done with similar debt work, that becomes a piece that will play into this as well. Am I correct by saying that, Mr. Contari?
Yeah, certainly without a doubt. Remember, you back that out of the calculation for the cap, but still no, it's a reality that we have on the revenue side.
When we were predicting years ago, this is the year that we thought would be one of the higher years. And
Yeah.
within the 2 years, I think it drops again drastically. But I remember this is one of those years we had talked about.
It definitely, this is a one-year bump in terms of debt service. Notwithstanding any other things that we might be adding at some point in the future. But right now, debt service will definitely level out for about 3 or 4 years, and then it will decrease by possibly $1.5 million or thereabouts at some point. So that's where we're kind of headed.
Yeah.
Assuming that we haven't added any energy performance contracts yet.
Yeah, I just, you know, as a trustee up here, I'm trying to be sensitive to the community and, you know, what they've gone through financially recently. And then, Dr. Herr, you actually brought up debt service, actually, since we're talking about it. I just want to be clear because I want to make sure I understand this myself. The library debt service, that is being offset on the revenue side. So from our perspective as a school district, we're just acting as a pass-through entity, correct?
We are the fiduciaries.
But the only thing you have
But
to
we
see
have
is,
to include it.
right, we have to include it. So when people see budget to budget, they're going to go, why is your budget up X amount of $1 million? Well, in this case, over 1% of it is going to be due to the library. As I said, though we do get the revenue from it, but it does raise our budget.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's probably, you know, moving forward an important point to emphasize, just because if I saw, wait a minute, you're asking me for 4 point some odd percent, you're telling me it's the library, I thought they told me this other thing. I could see a lot of people being upset about that, so.
Yeah, and remember that the budget increase, which it could mean about 1%, maybe even more than 1%.
Right.
That's the library piece of it. But on the tax level, cap side, you know, again, if ultimately it ends up that you could raise taxes by 4%, still be within the tax cap, you still might not have to do that.
Sure.
Ultimately, and still bring in a budget that, and a whole entire financial package that is worthy of support for the community.
Yep.
We're proud to bring that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thank you, appreciate it.
Any other trustee questions? Mr. Johnson?
With regard to the debt service, that works converse as well, meaning, let's say we had debt service from 15 years ago that was coming off the books next year. That would then affect our tax cap and then alter it to converse, where we wouldn't be able to raise it maybe below 2% because we had a major debt service come up. So I think people need to realize that as well, that when you bring on debt, it impacts the tax cap, but it also, then we get state aid, so it cancels out on the revenue
On the
side.
building aid side of it, you can't tell with it. If you're getting the building, then you gotta back that up.
Yeah.
So you can't count it. But you'll notice that if we didn't have an exclusion, our levy would have to drop by $900,000. So, you know, there's I feel bad for a school district that has no capital program at the moment or whatever. But again, it's 1 year could be, you know, different than the next, so to speak. It's an interesting crapshoot, so very good.
Any other trustee questions?
I just want to say thank you. I mean, for 5, 6 years, I've never seen in January where we're really looking at solid numbers where we say, wow, we're kind of worst case scenario and we're not having a wiggle under the tax cap. I think we're in a really good position for where we're going to have room to grow in the next couple of months.
I am optimistic that we're going to be able to come forward, and as we're talking about some of the things program-wise that we're going to be able to say, okay, let's move on from some of the old stuff we had to worry about. Let's talk about how we continue to enhance our district. That's what I'm hoping.
And that was trying to get some positions early as possible. That gives us time to really plan.
Any other trustee questions? Any community members want to come to the podium, questions about this? Mr. Montero, thank you so much, sir. We truly appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Moving on to the consent agenda, and the only items the board would like to remove from the consent agenda and place down on the regular agenda. I'm hearing any, can I have a motion to approve consent agenda items F, G, H, I, J, and K? Mr. Brodsky, second. Any discussion? Not hearing any, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 6-0. Moving on to the regular agenda. I have a motion to gratefully accept the following donations from SEED, the Center for the Workplace, and the Academy Street. Mr. Brodsky, second by Mr. Krug. Again, we really want to thank the SEED Foundation, as always, for donating $500 for the Civil War Day, the Center for the Workplace Solutions. This is going to be for the athletics at the high school. This is $250, and then the Academy Street PTA box tops for the office supplies at Academy School. Any other discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 6-0. Moving on to the next 5 policies, can I have a motion to approve the first reading of policy 1501.1, the use of school facilities? Mr. Brodsky, second. Was that Mr. Romo? Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Moving on to the next one is, can I have a motion to approve the policy 1501.1 regulation?
Mr. Miller, a quick question about that. I believe that our policy manual requires us to read twice before we adopt. So can we actually abolish this policy yet? Because
For Mr. Brodsky, I believe the way the policy reads is an existing policy. We get to
Okay.
one,
Perfect.
new policy has to be two.
awesome. Okay, thank you.
So I can have a motion to approve or abolish policy 1501.1 regulation. Mr. Brodsky, second. And Ms. Pendola, any other discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 6-0. Moving on to our next policy, can I have a motion to approve the first reading of policy 5450.1, suicide prevention procedures and regulations? Ms. Pendola, second. Mr. Krug, any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? This one was worked on by a lot of people, so I just want to thank all the staff members who put a lot of time in to make sure this policy was updated to where it needs to be for baseball football. Moving on to the next budget, can I have a motion to approve the first reading of policy 6150, budget transfers? Ms. Pendola, second. Mr. Romo, any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 6-0. And the last policy under the regular agenda tonight, can I have a motion to approve the first reading of policy 6600, fiscal accounting and reporting? Ms. Pendola, second by Mr. Krug. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 6-0. At this time, we'll open it up for any community members for any new or old business. Not seeing any questions in the chat, we will open it up for any trustees for new business. Not hearing any, we will, can I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Krug, second. Ms. Pendola, all in favor? Guys, thank you so much for coming tonight. We truly appreciate it. We'll see you back